Hey guys, welcome back to the Lou Perez Podcast. My name is Lou Perez. If you'd like to support my work, please head over to thelouperez.locals.com and join the Lou Perez community. You'll get to listen to my podcasts and watch my sketch comedy videos before I release them to the rest of the world. And you'll also have access to exclusive content for members only. And if you're looking for another way you can support me, you can do so by supporting my sponsors. Black Organic Cold Brew. Just head over to www.blvckbrew.com and use promo code LOU for free shipping. And if you're into CBD products, please check out Paloma Verde CBD. Head over to palomaverdecbd.com and use promo code LOU for 25% off purchases over $75. All right, here we go. Tonight, or today, or this morning, whenever you're listening or watching this, I am joined by Travis Brown and Corey Drayton. We are going to be talking about a project that both of these guys have worked on called the Woke Reformation. And as far as what I know about the project, it's a docu-series. And Travis, maybe you could tell us a little bit more about it.
Yeah, well, I also want to say we're also here with Nora, which you can at least see her leg.
She hangs out with me. For those of you who are only listening to the audio, Travis has a very cute dog. Is she a puppy?
No, she's like 2.
She's very tiny.
Just small. Yeah.
She's like a Chihuahua? What's going on there?
It's like, terrier Chihuahua mix. She's just the sweetest. She's the sweetest thing.
There you go. And for those of you who are watching, Travis has this setup where he's lying down on a bed and he has what would be sort of the point of view of like a bedroom in the 70s of like a stud who just, brings lovers back home every night and like wants to, watch himself make love. That could be what this is about for our purposes. Travis, maybe you can explain the setup.
Yeah, I was gonna say if only, but no, I have debilitating back pain, which is why I have to rig things up so that I can lay down. I spend about 90% of my time laying down, which is not fun, but I have a really great camera crew and lighting crew and sound crew that helps me make this series, and so yeah, I'm able to still do it. I direct from a portable cot with a similar setup to this.
Wow.
So
I remember the actress Isabella Rossellini, I believe she was talking about her father, and she said like her dad spent like 90% of his time in bed. But I don't think it wasn't for anything like debilitating. It was he just liked operating from his bed. So
interesting. Yeah,
little thing there. But yeah, so Travis, the Woke Reformation. For one, it's going to be premiering and appearing, I think, on locals.com. So, we'll put that plug out there. And yeah, tell us about it.
Yeah. So it's going to air on Locals first, along with some exclusive content there. And then it eventually will be available on YouTube because I want the widest possible audience. In addition to that, I may turn it into a feature film. So there's lots of opportunities to see it. But to see it first, you need to go to Locals. And yeah, I grew up in a fundamentalist Christian home. It was very kind of cult-like and really intense, very, very dogmatic and tribalistic. And anyone who disagreed was considered a heretic, essentially. And it was really hard to operate in that space and be a free thinker of any sort. So eventually I slowly started doubting my faith and left it behind in my late teens, early 20s. And then I was like, okay, I'm going to move somewhere where there's a lot more liberal, progressive people. I think those would be my kinds of people. And so I moved to Seattle, and then I moved to Portland in 2007. And I slowly started to realize like there are a lot of similarities to this like pretty far left leaning city and group of people as to what I grew up with, especially when the social justice warriors and activists started being even more loud and predominant in on social media in the mid 2010s. So that really bothered me because I saw a lot of similarities between what I grew up with and what I was experiencing just on social media within friend groups, etc. And I thought, man, there's something to this. So then I became friends with Pete Boghossian, and he's been talking about this stuff for a long time. And he and James Lindsay were calling it a religion back in 2015, I think it was. And so that really intrigued me, and I thought, hey, it's a good opportunity to document the origins of this stuff and to help people understand it better. So that's kind of the motivation.
And we hear the word woke used a lot. Do you, or Corey, like what do you guys, if you had to define woke, and maybe Corey, you want to talk about that?
Yeah, sure. If I had to define the word woke, I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind is misguided. But really, it's essentially an ideology arising from postmodernism that ostensibly seeks to solve a number of deep-seated social problems. Although it is also characterized by a hyper religiosity, zealous behavior, people who think that they're completely entitled to assume the motivations of other people and have to tear down every institution and every structure in order to build their utopia, their ideal vision. That's how I would define it.
And how'd you guys come together? How'd you guys meet up to be able to work on this together?
Oh, can I throw something in there for the
Sure.
definition? Yeah, so I like Corey's definition, and I would just include that the history of that word, the etymology, I think it dates back to the 70s, if I'm not mistaken. But really, what it used to mean was to be awakened to injustice, which I think is an honorable goal. I think it's something that we should all strive for. Some people still use it in that way, but for the most part, I see it as sort of a catch-all phrase for these far left, social justice, critical race theory, gender theory, etc. ideologies. So just to clarify.
Yeah, it seems like the scope of where injustice is, just sort of expands and expands and expands, where it's almost like gravity. It's just one of the injustices, one of the forces that has that touches upon everything and has an impact on everything. So how did you guys meet up and start working on this together?
You want to take that one, Corey?
Yeah, I had just come out of a 2-year-long battle with terminal cancer, and so I was trying to get a sense of, okay, I'd been in the film industry for 23 years. I want to get back to work. I want to do things differently. Something inside of me had said there's something about the environment of working in Hollywood and working on film sets that I just said, if I'm going to go back to doing this kind of work, I want to be very intentional about it. I've been a fan of Pete Boghossian's work for a very long time, and I just happened to catch an event that he was hosting at PSU that Travis was filming. And essentially, there were students who were going up on a stage, and they were all sharing their experiences of wokeness and some of their concerns. And Pete happened to mention that Travis was a documentary filmmaker in town here in Portland, and said, oh, hey, we're in the same industry. I didn't know that there were people in my field who were questioning this ideology. And so immediately I looked Travis up, saw that he had a number of projects, documentary projects that he was producing that questioned some of these ideas. So I filled out a survey, shared some of my own experiences of encountering the woke on film sets and how I felt it negatively impacted me. And he got back to me straight away. It just seemed like we hit it off. And next thing you know, I'm in his show, and we've been friends ever since.
Yeah, and with battling terminal cancer, what kind of cancer was it specifically?
Stage 4 colorectal. And the crazy thing about this whole situation that I'll say is that cancer doesn't really run in my family. So I do believe that there was a psychosomatic component to it, and I think some of that I owe to just the stress I was dealing with in the industry.
Wow.
Yeah.
And did your
I'm
sorry, I was just going to ask, like your politics, or did it change as you were going through your battle, or like did you have a woke moment, if you will, and awaken to something else?
Sure. Not really. No, I've always been very skeptical of all true belief systems. I don't really care if you're the left or the right. I see it as a fake dialectic that is managed by some very elite interests. So I'm the sort of person who just takes the issues one at a time on their face, and I engage with them on their individual merit. So I was never on the left. I was never on the right. I would say, if anything, I've always had a bit of a libertarian bent, and I'm a very capitalist person, although I do recognize the limitations inherent to that as a belief system, certainly. But in terms of my politics, I have never identified with either side. Just gives me an issue and I'll weigh in. So the moment for me really was just being on sets and hearing people that I was working with. So I'm in camera department, I'm a cinematographer. Sometimes I'll play other roles, but always within the same department. So first assistant camera, focus puller, that sort of thing. And I would always overhear these conversations that people would have about various social justice issues. And no one would ever ask me for my opinion. But they certainly seem to be experts on what they consider to be the Black experience, which I take issue with because I don't think that's a thing in particular.
Yeah, I remember being on set because I do comedy, and it was some years back, maybe like 6 or 7 years back, and for some reason we were having some downtime, and one of the actresses just started a conversation about, I think it was healthcare, and they brought up the Koch brothers, which is all, automatically, it's not going to be good if the Koch brothers are brought up. And they were talking about the Koch brothers and regarding healthcare. And then they started saying that the Koch brothers are against immigration. And I was like, my mind just started reeling, because one of the biggest criticisms against the Koch brothers being libertarians is that they're quote unquote open borders, So it was, and I think I may have offered a correction to the record that I don't think went over very well. But I have no idea if that necessarily affected my my future prospects. But it was very weird in that it's like, is this an actual conversation, or is it a one-sided lecture that it's almost like we have a hive mind and this is on everybody's mind. So I'm just speaking our thoughts out loud, as a way to sort of say, all right, we're still on the same team. Everybody here. Okay. These are still the things that we believe. Travis, you can, oh, sorry.
Do you mind if I just speak to that real quick?
Sure.
Because what you just said about the sort of chilling effect in this situation that you mentioned, that ties in directly to what I was saying about the psychosomatics of cancer, is the fact that I had spent 23 years working on these sets, being around very progressive people who were always having these kinds of conversations. I would say much more recently has that become a feature of being on a set, but I would always keep quiet. And I would keep quiet because for me, I knew I was doubting their conclusions, and I wanted to engage in the epistemology of what they were saying. Okay, how do they know what they know? But I didn't feel I could even do that effectively without tarnishing myself, getting a label slapped on me, and being blacklisted from the industry. So I stayed quiet, and I think that contributed to my stress and to me getting sick.
Yeah, and it's a huge, like you said, it's a huge risk because oftentimes and nowadays you don't necessarily know how someone is going to react to just disagreement, and also that there is something rather just unprofessional about having these kinds of discussions on a workplace, and I've had the experience, fortunately, of producing sketch comedy and having actors of all stripes involved, and they're having conversations about politics and stuff, and I'm just like, I don't care. We need to shoot this thing. We need to get this over with, and right, I'm happy that you guys are talented. Otherwise, maybe I wouldn't want to put up with your shit. But Travis, you were going to say something, I think. So.
Oh, it just when you're talking about people essentially virtue signaling on set and making sure that everyone has the right opinions. I mean, again, that just reminds me of my experience growing up with the fundamentalist version of Christianity, where people would do the same thing. I mean, just in a different context and different set of beliefs, but it was the same kind of behavior. And also what would come along with it would be often, excuse me, a kind of self-righteousness. Like, if you don't follow this set of beliefs, if you don't agree with us 100%, you are wicked and evil. I mean, literally, this was what was told to me. And my dad would quote Jeremiah 17:9, which is, "The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it?" So whenever I disagreed with him, even though I was a Christian at the time and believed it, I was told that that my heart is, I'm deceiving myself, that my heart is wicked. You know, I mean, it really robbed one of any opportunity for self-confidence. But, you know, so I see the same kind of thing with this woke shit. It's like, you know, if you don't go 100% along with what we call anti-racism, you are a racist. You know, you are a bad person. I mean, and that's the worst word you can call somebody in 2021, in my opinion. And yet people are called that all the time because they don't fit a particular mold.
Well, now something really interesting is happening in regards to racism, where I feel like it almost feels like a few months ago being called a racist was the worst thing that could possibly happen. But now you have people openly saying, we're all racist. Every person is racist. I am going to step up and proclaim my racism. And I'm thinking like, are you out of your fucking mind? Like, how are you? You know, it's like, well, I'm not with you on that. It sounds like you're just, you know, sort of proclaiming something about yourself and hoping that you can sort of hide out in the crowd, you know?
Yeah. Robin DiAngelo, of course, comes to mind. I mean, yeah, her book, in her book, she admits not only that she's racist, but even recounts a tale of her showing up to a park where she was going to attend a birthday party and she didn't know who the people were. There was a group of black folks and a group of white folks. And she thought to herself, and she admits this in the book, oh, I hope it's not with the black folks. And I'm thinking, wow, you really are kind of racist. Like, why the hell would, like, what's wrong with you? And then not only that, she extrapolates, as you say, onto everyone else. So everyone must be this way. And I have the solution now. I mean, she's clearly what I like to call a new style of televangelist, because that's what she's just selling bullshit.
I haven't had the fortune of reading her book yet, but I know.
Hopefully, I'll save you the trouble.
A friend of mine was he was reading and he was asking the question. It's like, does anyone else, like, are these genuine interactions with black people? Like, who has these sorts of interactions? Corey, for those people who are just listening to this, Corey, I take it you're a black man. I think does that work? Does that to say that, or?
Well, it's part of my identity. I mean, I've got some mixed heritage, some Jewish heritage too, and I was primarily raised Jewish. But yeah, I mean, for all working purposes, I'm just me. I'm just Corey. I've never approached the world through this lens of, oh, I have a specific racial identity, and therefore it must color everything that I do and say. And it's interesting. I was having a conversation yesterday, actually, with Pete Boghossian about this very thing. And I was saying to him that, you know, like, I've actually, as much as I feel somewhat ashamed to admit it, I've never had a black friend in the States anyway. And we got into this interesting cultural discussion about, you know, why that might be. And really what it is the fact that I grew up in a completely different cultural context. We were moving from place to place throughout my entire upbringing. Obviously, I have a specific inflection, a specific accent, a way of speaking. And anytime I've encountered a black person in the United States, I always get this absolute hostility. There's no curiosity there. There's no, oh, tell me more about you as an individual. It's just straight up hostility and distrust.
Wow.
And so that's something that that was part of, I think, the woke moment for me, was really having a lot of time to sit with that and reflect on that and kind of say, okay, why might this be occurring? And what does it actually mean to be black in the context of the United States? Why should that carry so much baggage? And why do I feel that if I were to say, oh, yes, I'm 100% black, which I'm not, also what comes along with that is all of the cultural assumptions around blackness that get foisted upon you by particularly the woke. And I can't claim any of those things as my own. I came from an intact family. My parents stayed together. I grew up very affluent. I had a tremendous amount of opportunities growing up. So I don't own the black experience trademark, whatever that is.
Yeah, I remember a few years ago reading an article, or maybe it was a few articles about how black American actors were being passed over for roles by all these black Brits coming here and taking our fucking jobs, which I felt, and I was like, oh my God, it's so funny because one of my favorite actors is Idris Elba. And I absolutely love Idris Elba in The Wire. He's fantastic. He was great in The Office as well. And then recently, only a few months ago, somebody at the BBC, I think it was like a diversity officer or something like that, complained that his character Luther wasn't black enough. That Idris Elba's character, this hard-nosed detective in London, wasn't black enough. And it was like, well, what do you mean by this? Like, yeah, he should have more West Indian friends, and he should eat more like West Indian food. And it's like, oh, man, it's kind of like the show Luther is kind of like boilerplate detective, he's on cases and, he has a trouble, he works too much. So his marriage, breaks up and all that. And it's like, damn, what do you, there's always the image of the snake eating itself, and but something to remember is that the snake also has two penises. So it's sort of like the snake is also sucking its own dick on this. If there's a happy image, in that. Travis, go ahead.
Yeah, it's just amazing to me how essentialist this woke movement is, and I always like to put things in context. So Corey mentioned the black experience. I think to myself, would I want someone to be talking about the white experience? I mean, what the fuck is that? That's like some KKK shit. I don't know what that is, and I don't know why people think it's fine to just throw that term around for black, white, whatever color a person is. I mean, I really like Heather McDonald's framing of this, which is she talks about how much gonad, or she talks about how much melanin is in your skin. She talks about gonads and melanin, which I think is hilarious and like the perfect way to frame this, because I mean, Martin Luther King Jr. was correct in focusing on the content of our character. I know that's used almost as a trope now, but it really was extremely insightful. And that's that insight and that perspective we were starting to really achieve, and now it's being reversed by these anti-racists, and it's just really unfortunate. And so I'm totally with Corey, and I happen to have less melanin in my skin than him, but who gives a shit? I also like Camille Foster's framing of this, where he doesn't think of himself as black because race is really essentially a construct, which the anti-racists do admit, but then they obsess over it. So they admit that it's a social construct and that it's more appropriate to talk about populations rather than, races. But then they obsess over it, and I think it should just stop with it's just a construct. Like, let's just move past it as much as we can.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so go ahead, Corey. Yeah.
Yes, I was going to say, the essentialism of it all. That's something that I've always, I almost have an allergic reaction to it, because I can certainly tell that the people who, at least for the most part, the everyday person on the street, the sort of garden variety wokeists. I don't mean the people at the top of the ideology. The people at the kind of the grassroots level of it all, they think they're showing cultural sensitivity. They think they're saying, "Oh, I'm sensitive to the experiences of Group X in the context of the United States or wherever they happen to be." I understand that their underlying motivations might be genuine, but I don't understand when we got away from individualism as a virtue and really getting to know a human being authentically, person to person, without having to classify them as part of a larger group. I'm not sure exactly when that shift occurred.
Yeah, because I remember I'm 39, so I grew up, in the late 80s, early 90s, and I remember, when it came to TV shows, like all my favorite TV shows were, mostly black casts. In Living Color, Martin.
How dare
Rock, you? Rock, Living Single. Chris Rock had a show on HBO for a while. Stand-up comedy as well. Obviously hip hop and rap were, if not the most popular music at the time. It was right before it became the most popular, more than country. And so when I look around now, I'm like, I asked the same question. I don't know, like, when did this happen? Because it's almost like the country that I grew up in it never happened. You know, it's sort of like there's an alternate universe where all that really great stuff happened. Travis, do you have thoughts on that? Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think it's been a slow erosion. I mean, Corey mentioned the roots of this stuff in postmodernism. So it was really like in the 80s and 90s that this stuff started to sort of fester and grow and really be concocted in our university system by activist scholars like Kimberly Crenshaw, Richard Delgado, many more. But they have been sort of setting up this architecture behind the scenes for a really long time. And so for most people, you know, it was 2020 when it like hit them with, you know, with this stuff, when they feel like they were hit with a ton of bricks, because it just seemed like it was out of nowhere. But the reality is it's not out of nowhere. It's been, as Pete talks about, it's been festering in colleges of education for decades now. And it, you know, they very slowly started to change the language, very slowly started to change how we should view each other. I mean, slowly also reintroducing segregation, for instance. I mean, you know, I also want to be clear, this movement, I think, achieves the opposite of what it claims. And I think Corey can speak to that too. But, you know, it's not really all about equality. You know, it's about equity, which is very different. And I think it's really sad because there are injustices out there that we should fight. And yet, you know, this movement doesn't help us do that. And so that's something I hope will come through in my series, is just an understanding of this stuff. The first 2 episodes are based largely on James Lindsay and Helen Pluckrose's book, Cynical Theories, which is a brilliant book that maps out all this stuff and just how things have slowly eroded over time and changed over time.
Corey, were you going to add to that?
I don't want to derail the point. It was just specifically about what you were saying about the culture of the 80s and 90s.
Sure.
Let me touch on it real quick. It was really interesting because there's a couple of things that came to my mind just listening to you share your own experiences. One of those is music. Confession, I've never been into hip hop or rap music. I've always despised both. And that's mainly because of a lot of the cultural messaging of the music during that time. There was a lot of, you know, drugs and violence, and it seemed to elevate the worst aspects of a Black stereotype and celebrate those things in a very cynical way. I was much more into heavy metal, punk rock, and classical music. That was me. And so, you know, when I first discovered Black punk bands or Black metal bands, like, and I mean Black as in melanin, not just the sound or the tone, like Death or Bad Brains, you know, it was amazing to me, but I always just looked at them as great musicians. I didn't really give a flying fuck that they were Black. I didn't care at all. And the same thing with television. I mean, you know, I'm a huge Star Trek fan. So when Star Trek got its first Black captain, Benjamin Sisko, in Deep Space Nine, is played by Avery Brooks, I was much more interested in how he was as a character on that show, dealing with the situations he was in. The fact that he was Black didn't factor in to him being a fantastic captain. So I just wanted to touch on those things because I feel like there's an ideological component to it, just as Travis is saying, but there's also a cultural component as well. And it seems that the culture sets up certain expectations. And I think the culture now, well, you have to have your Black character and your female character and this, that, and the other, and they have to cleave to a specific set of essentialist characteristics. And I think that's very limiting and uncreative.
Insulting.
You know, so you mentioned the band Death. There's a great documentary. I think it's called The Band Death. And it's Death. Yeah, and it's nice. 3 brothers from Detroit who were sort of, I guess they were like proto-punk. Sort of punk before
my dog, sorry.
Okay. Your dog's communicating with what was it? Is it Nora? What's the
Oh yeah, Nora. Yeah. She can't hear.
Is she deaf? Oh no, you have, you have headphones in. Yeah. I was like, you are a very wonderful person to be taking on a deaf dog. But it's a really great documentary, a band called Death, and I got to see it in the theaters years back. But there is something too in the culture where I remember growing up in the suburbs of Queens and going to Long Island to see like punk shows, and I forget what the band's name was, but their drummer was Black. And we were like, because it was like mostly like white and Jewish kids and stuff. And it was like, well, this band has got to be cool because it's a black guy playing punk rock. They were actually really good, but there was something like, oh, cool. What, we must be in a really cool spot because there's a black guy who's here. He's sort of christened it. You know, it's like, all right, you guys are cool. So I mean, you know, I think that's part of the culture. I mean, I think that, you know, in a way that is sort of a cross to bear, you know, where it's sort of like, if I'm the black kid, I got to be the cool one. You know, I got to sort of make all my friends feel a little cooler that they, you know, that they could hang with me.
Mm-hmm.
But with the woke stuff, so we touched on, we have woke, and a big part of that is this anti-racism, and then there's a component of critical race theory, right?
Yeah.
Do you touch upon that in the series?
Yeah. Asra Nomani is she's one of my favorite people. She's amazing. She's a journalist, investigative journalist, and initially she was speaking out for women's rights in Islam, but then her son was attending this high school, and some of this stuff was introduced, this really backwards diversity training, sensitivity training. So she ended up investigating this and reading, like, okay, what are the roots of this ideology? So that took her into critical race theory. And so she gave a great interview, of which I will include parts in the series. I've read some of the work myself, the critical race theory work. It's fascinating because, I mean, it does underlie most of the everyday anti-racist ideology that exists now. And two, what I thought was really interesting and telling was toward the end of the book, they were talking about spreading these ideas, and they literally used the word converts.
Oh, really?
And that really stuck out to me. I was like, wow, okay, so you're not even really trying to hide this. It really is like a religion, even to you. And so I thought that was pretty fascinating.
And from what we can glean from the history of, Christianity or Islam, it's either, you could willingly convert, or
right.
You can be conquered and, forced to convert.
Well, can I add to that?
Yeah, sure.
Something I think is really fascinating is that I think on a large scale, people are being indoctrinated and sort of being converted without their realization or without knowing it. And one of the key aspects of indoctrination, I went through this myself, is not knowing that it's occurring, right? You don't know that you're being indoctrinated into a new religion. And so my point is that I think that that's happening on a mass scale, and lots of people who are otherwise good and intelligent people are being indoctrinated into this cult-like anti-racism, that's based around the critical race theory ideology.
Can I add something to that real quick?
Sure. Yeah.
Just what you were saying,
Please.
Travis. The interesting thing about that is that the ideology fundamentally relies on people's good nature, right? Because if you are genuinely a racist, terrible person, and someone accuses you of being a racist, you're just like, yeah, so what? The sky is also blue, big deal, right? And so if there are so many people who are willing to go along with this, feeling like it's the virtuous thing to do, then clearly they're not racist. I mean, logically that would follow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate the way it plays off of people's good instincts, as Corey said. I mean, most of the people who are going along with this, unless they're the Robin DiAngelos or the Ibram X. Kendis, perhaps, most of them are like just thinking like, oh, this is the new morality of 2020 and 2021. Like, so of course we have to be for social justice. I mean, Corey and I have talked about this at length, but these people are brilliant in their marketing because they use words like Antifa, anti-fascist, anti-racism. All of these words sound good, and yet they mean something very different from what we would assume.
And the fact that this, grew out of academia, right? It sounds smart. Like, it sounds like,
right.
Well, this is, I mean, if you're evolved, if you're an intelligent person, then you have to get with this stuff. And what I find, I think one of the struggles, I think overall in sort of combating this stuff is you have this really, dense academic jargon, and some of it is so dense that even if you criticize it and then you end up picking it apart, you're like sort of just one step below the same jargon. So it's sort of, you might be limiting
Right.
the audience that you have that could actually understand what the hell you're talking about. And I've enjoyed like James Lindsay. I think James Lindsay does a really great job in long form, like on podcasts, where he's able to really get into this stuff. But when it comes to the writing and what he's responding to, like it could really be dense and could be really tough to it's tough to bring if you're a layman. If you're like, wait, I just want to send my kids to school and have them go on to college and and all that.
And that's on purpose. Some of the language is impenetrable on purpose. Like, for instance, Judith Butler is one of the worst writers I have ever had the displeasure of reading. But I read Gender Trouble, and it's intentionally confusing. It's intentionally not clear, because that way, if you try to criticize it, if you try to poke holes in it, she can be like, well, that's not really what I meant. You just don't understand. There's like this extra level of intelligence that you don't happen to have, and therefore we can get away with, and it's not just her, it's many of these people just intentionally being or obfuscating in their writing, which it makes it really hard to criticize.
Anytime I see the word hegemony, I'm like, uh-oh, what's going on here? Why are you
Right.
using that word?
Just patriarchy, yeah, all those words.
Yeah. And did you guys go through college or grad school? Is this something that you found when you were in school studying, or did this come later, this kind of stuff?
I'll let Corey go first if you want.
Sure.
Sure. Yeah. It was. I did undergrad and grad school. I was crazy enough to go to film school, and the thing is too. I will say that the seeds of it were there. I feel like the fundamentals were definitely a part of every single course I took, but I don't think it was anywhere near as thick as I'm hearing about now. Yeah. I do feel that, at least from a pedagogical standpoint, I did get an actual education. I was at least, I did at least come away knowing about film as language, how to actually make a movie, how to mise-en-scène, camera work, those things. I came away with all of that, but I definitely also came away with a foundation in postmodernism, which I didn't sign up for. Yeah. So, reading Derrida, reading Foucault, things of that nature, I'm glad I did it, because at least I can understand the ideological roots of this belief system, but I never bought into it. And it's a shame to think that even back then, this was 2001, having to pretend to go along with these ideas just so that I could get a good grade in the class and get my degree. But internally knowing, I feel like I'm telling lies and I don't want to be in that position. It felt horrifying emotionally. So once I got out into the industry, I said, okay, great, good. I can leave the theory behind, focus on the work. And boy, was I naive, because I encountered it everywhere.
Yes, similar thing with me, where there was sort of this idea, all right, this is kind of the bullshit you only read in college and you don't have to worry about it. It's not going to have an impact anywhere else in the real world. Write your essay, get your passing grade, and just move on to the next required, course that you need to take. And Travis, what about you?
No, it's interesting. I really despised the idea of going to university, because I went to a private Christian school that told me you will not amount to anything unless you go to a 4-year university, and they lied to me about what classes I had to take just to graduate from high school. So I already had just a negative taste of in my mouth. So all I did was go to a tech school. I got a computer information science degree, just an AA. That's as far as my education went. And then I just started reading about this stuff. I was interested in philosophy and film, and so I just sort of read up on it myself. And what's interesting is, though, I think in like 2007, 2008, when I first moved to Portland, I met these guys that were also interested in philosophy, and they introduced me to the deconstructionists, as we called them then. But those postmodern philosophers like Foucault and Derrida and others, and they were obsessed with them. And so we did this sort of like philosophy night once a week. We would like share certain writings, and then we'd have a conversation about it. And I found them to be insufferable after just a few times, because all they would do is pick apart what you had to say. That was all that they would do, and they wouldn't offer anything meaningful, anything useful. They just would deconstruct it. And so I had kind of an earlier window into this, but not from college, but from people who probably were college educated, and yeah, I just found it terrible and frustrating and meaningless.
I can really relate to that, Travis, because I'll tell you too. It was interesting at first to kind of hear these people out and say, okay, deconstructionism, tell me more.
Right.
But then over time, I noticed that the two things that seemed to always follow the people who had these ideas was one, a sense of nihilism about everything.
Yes.
And second of all, they couldn't make good art. They couldn't tell a good story. They couldn't make a good film. They couldn't connect with you emotionally. Everything had to be torn down and deconstructed. And it's a hell of a lot easier to burn a house down than it is to build one. Yeah. And I seemed to pick that up very early on. And so I just said, okay, I might be my hands of this. And I didn't take it on.
Yeah, especially when you're...
I will say...
So go ahead.
Oh.
Yeah. Oh, I was just going
to...
Yeah.
Oh, please go ahead.
Cool. I'm keeping this in, ladies and gentlemen. We are three people speaking over Zoom. This is the way you do it. No, I was just going to say, Corey, like you're going to school, learning, to how to use a camera, how to set up scenes, how to do stuff that has, there's physical value there that you will need to make this stuff. And one of the things that I absolutely can't stand is when I go. I enjoy going to museums with my wife. It's one of our pastimes, and when I go and especially with the modern stuff or the contemporary stuff, almost every single time they will have a film that's been shot recently, and not 10 times out of 10 it is garbage. It is absolute garbage where you're like, how the hell are you? We have people producing things with their iPhone that look phenomenal. And then this person, this artist, this visual artist gets a grant for I don't know how many tens of thousands of dollars to make shit. And it's almost like it's almost like that there's a game that or a performative nature where everybody involved in the production of this thing is going to pretend like something is happening there that isn't. It's like there's no skill, there's no no polish. So that's just a pet peeve of mine. I had to get that up.
Yeah. And just to play off that just for a moment, I completely agree with you. And I was trying to figure out if maybe this is a generational thing. Maybe people who came up in a more digital, less analog age have that attitude of relationship to art because it's just less costly for them. When I was in film school, we were learning on super 16mm and 35mm film. And so we had to spend money on every single shot, and you could not afford to be frivolous with what you were shooting. And so because of that, I feel that for the most part, I came away with a deeper understanding about maybe this isn't the time to mess around with deconstruction. And I think now when you have a shooting ratio that's 20:1, because it's on your iPhone, maybe you're less attached to the process in that way. I don't know.
Yeah, it's one of the it's great that it's opened it up, so much to to the masses, but then it's also it's sort of what does the quality look like? I guess, and what does the future hold? For that. And Travis, before I cut you off, where were you?
Oh no, that's okay. I was kind of going a different direction, just to give the devil his due. There is a usefulness in deconstructing things and understanding how they work, and there's a usefulness in being skeptical of what the postmodernists called meta narratives, which are just these grand narratives like Christianity or Hinduism or Islam, or to even the idea of democracy. I think it's super useful to deconstruct those things to a point so that you understand how they work, so you can jettison the things that don't work. And it's sort of reminding me of Thomas Sowell's The Constrained and Unconstrained Vision. For anyone who hasn't checked that out, I highly recommend it. It's a brilliant book. And I won't do it justice here in describing it, but I think in the unconstrained vision, as he would put it, people want to come up with new ways of being, new laws, new morality. And then the constrained version, people are like more traditional and want to not necessarily upset the whole cart with the horse, if that's the right analogy. But anyways, I think there's usefulness in both. And like Corey, I myself don't really consider myself left or right. I think that those are not really very useful distinctions. But anyways, I just wanted to say that there are times where it makes sense to deconstruct something. It's just that the nihilism that comes along with, as Corey was saying, just total deconstruction ism is really harmful, and it doesn't lead us anywhere positive or to any good art.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I find as I've gotten older, I've become I think I've definitely become more conservative in my own dealings, and I wonder if a lot of that has to do with me just being tired, where it's sort of like upsetting the whole social order sounds like something you need a lot of cardio for, and something that you need you need more hours of sleep than I'm getting. But there is something to the idea of, okay, let's examine this, let's deconstruct it, let's see what's up. But also coming to a point where you accept, like, well, that's how this thing works. This is how it's going to work. And these ideas, it's sort of like if you were to bring the same idea to farming, at some point you're going to have to deal with, okay, well, this is the soil. This is how much rain we have. This is whether or not how much it'll cost to set up, some kind of watering system. And, at the end of the growth, when harvest comes around, we either have this to dig up or we don't. You could tell I'm not a farmer because I'm using, we have this to dig up or we don't. But to have like real world applications to the stuff, I think is really necessary.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you said that. This is something that I find myself constantly trying to communicate to people that I work with, specifically people who might be a little bit younger, is that it's fine to field ideas, it's fine to deconstruct and experiment, but ideological deconstruction in itself is a luxury, because in a situation where you're trying to really get something done and deliver a tangible product, and certainly in a survival scenario, like you're talking about with agriculture, you cannot afford to faff about with ideological deconstruction. You have to get the thing done. And it's interesting, I find myself running into this more and more if I'm working with a camera trainee who's maybe fresh out of university. They want to break all the rules. They want to do everything possible to deconstruct. And why are we doing it that way? Why? And usually the reasoning they have behind it stems from the ideology. It's anti-capitalist. And so they don't want to have a sense of professionalism, and they don't want to honor the way things are done because it goes against the core tenets of the ideology. I find it very bizarre.
Yeah, in a previous episode, I had a guest, Robert Jasinski, and one of the things that we talked about was his defense of the classics and his defense of Beethoven and classical music and Shakespeare. And one of the things that I brought up is that you'll often see people, especially in academia, saying you shouldn't have to read this book or watch this play or listen to this music. It shouldn't be required. You shouldn't have to check this out. But they're making that statement from the vantage point of having already read that book or seen that production or heard that music. And they're talking to people, young minds, fresh out of high school or, even younger, saying, you don't need this. And it's like, well, you can, it's possible to, have that foundation of the classics and then add on to it, music or stories or, cinema that, is more contemporary, and it's one of those things, talking about critical race theory, there's been a lot of debate on what that looks like in schools, in particular public schools. And I know that there's been a lot of pushback, especially from people on the right and also people on the left as well, saying, we don't want this stuff taught in public schools. And I've been seeing, I don't know if it's just kind of like, I don't know how much of this just only happens on Twitter. I don't know how many these conversations are actually happening in the real world. But I've seen quite a few people saying, well, if you believe in free speech, then you shouldn't be against banning CRT. And it's like, but we're talking about, currently as it stands, public education, these ideas being taught in public schools. Have you guys thought about that or want to weigh in?
Well, yeah, one of the main problems is that it's not just taught as an idea, it's taught as the gospel truth, and in addition to that, like I mentioned earlier, they literally at certain workplaces and schools are segregating people. I mean, this is just batshit insane. Like we got rid of this a long time ago, and now it's being reintroduced. And I would be okay with it if it was like, here's from this legal tradition from people like Kimberly Crenshaw, et cetera. These are ideas like intersectionality, which are actually kind of useful. They have some truth to them. And I would be okay with that more at like a high school or college level. But the fact that it's infused in through K through 12 schools, and people, if they're white, are often taught that they're the oppressors, and if if their skin is darker than a brown paper bag, for instance, this is an anecdote that I heard from Pete, then they're, if their skin is lighter than the paper bag, then they're part of the oppressor group. And if it's darker than the bag, then they're part of the oppressed group. And so that, it just sets people up for failure and contention. And so, no, I'm all for free speech, and I think it'd be fine to be like, hey, these are some ideas that these people have, but to put it out there as like the gospel truth, I think is really problematic.
Yeah, I completely agree with what Travis has expressed. If this, let's say, CRT, wokeism, call it what you will, if it was taught alongside other points of view and you were able to examine them as objectively as possible and then debate the merits of each and come away with your own conclusions, okay, fine. But we know that the people who are pushing it in schools in particular are not acting in good faith. I've often thought about this just from the context of having kids. I don't have kids yet. I do plan to at some point. And I often think about, how would I feel about my kid coming home and saying that an instructor or someone who's an authority figure at the school said something to them that undermined their self-esteem because they look a certain way, they can't be expected to do X, Y, or Z. I would be absolutely infuriated. And I do worry about if I have kids and they're in any sort of institution, the education institution in particular, I worry about someone saying something to them that undermines their ability to see themselves as they see themselves. I don't want them to be casualties of this war that we're having for who can claim ownership of universality, because that seems to me that that's a lot of what this is.
Yeah, I have a friend who he's Jewish. His wife is Puerto Rican, and they have a couple of young kids. And one day, his daughter came home from school and said, "Daddy," asked, "Daddy, are you white?" And he was very taken aback. He's like, where'd this come from? And she's like, because white people did a lot of bad things, and I want to know if you're white. And I have a son, and I have another one on the way, and I'm just imagining how I'm going to handle if I need to handle those conversations. And I'm also in a weird, I guess my children are going to be in a weird spot because they have a Spanish surname, right? But at least this one currently is blonde hair and blue eyed. So he's going to have to deal with the fact that he is both the oppressor and the oppressed. So, that I think that's a pretty heavy burden to place on a child, especially if he has to, come in every morning and bow at the altar of whatever new God is being created.
Totally. Yeah. It just sets up so much conflict that's unnecessary. You can have conversations about actual social justice. You can have conversations about the civil rights, about what remaining injustices there might actually be in society. This is not the way to do it. This, anti-racist, ideology from, the people like Ibram Kendi and others. That's not the way to root out injustice. It's not the way to find whatever remaining problems are left in our society. It's just totally derailing us. I think Douglas Murray in The Madness of Crowds talks about how these rights issues, gay rights, women's rights, minority rights, are kind of like a train that's just about to pull into the stop, and for no apparent reason at all, just goes veering off the track and out into the bushes, and that seems to be a pretty good metaphor for what's going on here. Like, we were just about to the place where everyone was equal. I mean, growing up in the 80s and 90s, for me, even though I grew up in an ultra conservative town, we hung out with black kids, and they were some of our best friends. Like, we just didn't even think about it. It just wasn't a thing. No one talked about it, and we knew about the history of racism and all that. But for us, like, that was one thing my parents definitely got right, is that from their perspective, God loves everyone the same. Doesn't matter what your skin color is, and whether or not a person believes in God is sort of irrelevant. I think everyone should think that way. Just treat everyone the same and not make these distinctions, these ever finer distinctions that are just derailing our progress.
Yeah, I think my best friend from, I think it was probably first grade to fifth grade, was Reggie, and Reggie was black. And what really made it like that we were perfect to be best friends is we had the same birthday. So
nice.
I was like, the stars aligned. I don't know who was born first, but we were both born on February 26th. So it was meant to be. So with the Woke Reformation, with the docu-series, what do you guys, hope to do? Like, how do you, change things, or where's the hope there, I guess?
Well, so I mentioned earlier that the first couple episodes are all about the origins of this stuff to help people understand it. And then really from there on, it's about, what this is doing to our society. And then also, I think I did dedicate like 3 episodes to what can be done about it. Like, what are some practical things that everyday people can do? And I want people to feel hopeful. A lot of people have reached out since I was lucky enough to go on Dave Rubin or the Rubin Report, saying like, oh, I feel some hope. Like, I'm so glad you're making this content. And, I am lucky enough to be able to tell Corey's story of surviving cancer and comparing the cancer of wokeness to the cancer of, the actual cancer that he experienced. So we have a really great episode there, I think. So I'm hoping it will inspire people. And then, like Douglas Murray and Nancy Rommelman and Azra Nomani all gave very concrete things that people can do, whether it's, your child's being taught this stuff, pull them out of the school, or, attend board meetings, or, a number of different things that people can do in the real world to actually move the needle.
Corey?
And I think for me, my hope for the film is many-fold. But if I had to sum it up, really, it comes down to speaking to the people who are really involved in this ideology and letting them know, hey, you might think that this is the extension of the civil rights movement and it's meant to solve problems that have been left unsolved, but it's not doing that at all. In fact, it's a grievance industry that's meant to line the pockets of some very cynical, self-interested people. And also, too, I want to contribute to the discussion around returning to individualism. I mean, I think that's really my primary goal. Is let's get away from group classifications. Let's get away from the essentialism, and let's get back to dealing with each other as human beings, face to face, again. And I think thereby you can actually foster empathy, and that will solve a lot of social problems. If people just can deal with each other as individuals, stop the grifting that's going on between various groups. I think that's my biggest hope and goal for the whole film.
Yeah, it's so odd that in a time where you would think there would be like sort of ultra individualism, because everybody has a camera, everybody has a method or a means of getting their thoughts out, whether it's social media. Everybody is literally taking selfies You would think it would be all about me, 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 me. Look how great I am. And I guess, for some people, it is that, but to have, sort of this group identity stuff, coming back up and coming back up so hard. It's something to really, I don't know, boggles my mind.
Yeah.
Speak to that real quick.
Go for it.
Just on that point, I think it is a culture of narcissism. It is a culture of me, 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 but the catch is that it's a culture of me, me, me on the surface. It's me, me, me as perceived by you. And what we have is a culture that hasn't done any internal work. They haven't done deep work. They haven't done shadow integration. They haven't dealt with their own trauma. They haven't looked at their own past. And they're disconnected from the universal meta-narrative. They're disconnected from all of the mythological figures and historical figures who have also been through this shit before. And they're told that they shouldn't care about those things and that those things are bad. And that if you're looking to the past for any inspiration to deal with yourself as an individual, then you're going down the wrong track. And I think that's part of it too, is really getting people to think about doing some internal work and doing some shadow integration and dealing with themselves before going off and trying to fix the world.
Yeah, and I want to piggyback off of that and wrap up by saying I totally agree with Corey that we need to treat each other as individuals and not treat each other on the basis of whatever group characteristics they happen to have. But we are, as you kind of alluded to, Lou, we are a social species, and we need groups. Actually, we're not going to be able to get through successfully progress as a society if we don't have a group. And so I would just say what I'm trying to do with the series and what I try to encourage is this idea of superordinate identities. So having identities that go beyond just skin color or what's between your legs. And for us, since we're all in the United States, that could be nationalism. But I would take it even further than that and say we should focus on we should focus on expanding our tribe as much as possible. And that's something I hope that people will start doing. And that will help, as Corey said, increase empathy and solve a lot of social problems.
Mm-hmm.
And it surprises me, I'll just end on this, it surprises me that more people haven't had that experience, because I can remember being a kid in the 80s and playing D&D, and this is back in the day when you would get beaten up for being a geek. But the moment I met other kids who played D&D, it didn't matter where they came from, it didn't matter anything about them. We all had a common interest, and we had a hell of a lot of fun together.
Right on.
Totally.
So for those of you who have tuned in to this episode of the Lou Perez Podcast, you are my D&D. So thank you for joining me. I want to thank again Corey Drayton and Travis Brown. The docu-series is the Woke Reformation, and we'll have links to it in the description. It's on locals.com, and that's also where you can support my work, thelouperez.locals.com. Guys, thank you so much.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for watching and or listening to my podcast. If you'd like to support my work, please head over to thelouperez.locals.com and join the Lou Perez community. And another way to support me is by supporting my sponsors. Black Organic Cold Brew. Head over to www.blvckbrew.com. Use promo code LOU for free shipping. And if you're into CBD products, please check out palomaverdecbd.com. Use promo code LOU for 25% off purchases over $75. All right. Bye.